Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. First of all, let me start with welcomes, introductions, and safety information. Welcome to everybody who's here today and also watching online. Also welcome to Hannah. I believe this is your initiation to presenting the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. I promise that our bark is not as bad as our bite. Or is it the other way around? I'm never quite sure with Osm. In terms of introductions, my name is Councillor Tony Dyer. I'm the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. Councillor Mark Bradshaw is the vice chair of Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. I will allow the other councillors to introduce themselves as and when they ask questions if they choose to do so. Safety information. As far as I'm aware, we're not expecting any fire alarm practice. So if the fire alarm does go, then it's for real. In which case, I'll ask you to quietly but firmly exit the building by the main doors to the council, to City Hall. Sorry, still trying to say council house. Go down the ramp to the right-hand side, and if you congregate in front of the cathedral. And let's all make sure we get there before Councillor Eddie does. Okay, agenda item number 2 is apologies for absence. Bronwyn, do we have any apologies?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillors Morris and Councillor Massey.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 3 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest from councillors? Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is minutes of the previous meeting. Are we happy to approve the minutes of the previous meeting, or is there anything that anybody would like to raise? Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 5 is chair's business. I have no announcements from the chair for this meeting, and that moves us on to agenda item number 6, which is public forum. Public forum, we have 2 questions from Suzanne Audrey. Suzanne is unable to attend, but her questions, officers have given responses to her questions. Councillor Kent?
Very briefly, I thought I should thank Suzanne because through her tweet I realised I had this meeting this afternoon which I had not spotted in my diary. So thanks, Suzanne, for making sure I turned up to work.
And I'm sure Suzanne will be sending you a consultancy fee for secretarial work or administrative work. We have 2 public statements. The first public statement is from Councillor Richard Eddy. Councillor?
Thanks, Chairman. My statement relates to actually OSM's annual scrutiny report. Members may recall last spring the Cabinet agreed to actually transfer controversially 200 facilities management staff, mainly cleaners and actually security officers, to Bristol Waste. That went ahead. Subsequent proposed transfer was ditched by the Cabinet before Christmas. When the original transfer of the 200 staff was approved by Cabinet, various commitments were publicly given by HWC investing in these service areas, no diminution of employees' rights, and indeed a legally binding TUPE agreement completed. Many cross-party members, including myself, support the grave concerns of the GMB, Unison and Unite unions that these political promises have not been adhered to. Firstly, we have seen no evidence of the claimed synergy of BWC taking over these services. Secondly, there has been none of the planned new investment in these services or staff. If anything, a diminution of resourcing and a stretching of rota commitments. Thirdly, many of us have received evidence of the poor management of the BWC cleaning and security contracts. Fourthly, there has been particular concern over the decision to cease cash transit and fail to tender for North Somerset Council's contract in this area. Fifthly, BWC's new business plan, which you looked at recently, indicates more outsourcing and has led to more concerns among about the working interests of those transferred staff. Obviously, the HR committee of this council only has a remit to look at employees and permanent staff or part-time staff. Accordingly, I would respectfully request that Osm contact the GMB, Unison and Unite unions to clarify the detailed allegations here. Call me old-fashioned, but I think Bristol City Council ought to honour the promises it has freely and openly made to its staff.
Thank you, Councillor Reddy. Statement number 2 is from David Wedgwell, Gordon Richardson, Ian Becky and Brendan Taylor. David, I imagine you're speaking on behalf of all 4.
Yeah, it's actually from Bristol Disability Equalities Forum, South Gloucestershire Disability Forum, and from the bus campaigns for Somerset and Gloucestershire, which obviously cover Bristol. Well, our concerns are about access to and from schools. Today was the first school term day without the supported bus network in operation. What we've seen is many young people having to travel into central Bristol to make journeys from South Bristol to Brislington and go into central Bristol and then catch buses back to Brislington Academy and to St Brendan's College. Equally in the area around West Bromtrim, North West Bristol, and around the areas of Southmead and West Bromtrim. At Henbury, people have had to travel again into Bristol to make journeys to go back to the University of the West of England, City of Bristol College, and to the Stroud and Gloucestershire College complex. Also, staff at Southmead Hospital are struggling to get to and from Bristol Parkway Station to the main rail network in order to access train services locally to get them to and from work, because there's only one bus service left. We have successful West Links in Brislington, now extended to Whitchurch, both in Baines and Whitchurch, Bristol, and across to Hengrove and Filwood. And we have some issues in Knowle and Tortown, but we don't have West Links that serve Ashton Vale, we don't have West Links that serve Albury Court, we don't have West Links that serve some of the most deprived parts of Bristol, and they're restricted from going there. If you try to book them, you will not be able to book them to Eastgate Centre, you will not be able to book them to St Paul's, you will not be able to book them into St Philip's or book them round in places of East and East On. They have no bus services at all. They are working class communities. The only place in any city region that has no buses to its working class communities is Bristol. Let's be clear, Bristol. And Marvin knows this because he's now had maps and plans. Thank you, Stephen, for that. He's seen it. He looked at it all last Thursday night. So it's quite shocking. We only have 20 West Links in the whole of the city region. We were supposed to have 42, it's now down to 20, might go up to 32, and we're staff shortages. It works if we don't have people joyriding them and taking from Brislington to Bristol Airport or from Freshford Railway Station to Kingston Seymour, which is near Clevedon, by the way, rather than using trains. So those are issues that on the buses. Real serious issues still need to be reviewed, still to be looked at. This can't be dropped. City Council needs to go away. It's going to become a big election issue next year. On the issue of information and tourism, this is my final point. It is shocking out there. We've spent years building Bristol tourism, Destination Bristol, now Destination West. We have no information on any bus stop, how to catch your bus, where to go to an interchange, how to get onto a ferry, how to catch. All you have is a little symbol up there, which is
10 seconds left.
It's shocking, really is shocking, and we watch tourism struggle. Also, Stephen, there are out-of-date maps and timetables and plans across the whole of the city. It is quite against the Transport Act of 2017. You speak to WECA, they do nothing. Anybody contacts WECA, they do not move on anything. And this needs sorting out. They cannot be an authority that does
David,
not
you need to
respond
wrap up now.
passengers. And that is the main issue. So I ask the Chief Executive here again, if he can raise this at the highest level at WECA and also with Dan Norris to see if we can get this sorted. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, that brings us on to agenda item number 7, which is the 2023-2024 Corporate Business Plan and Performance Framework. This is the main course for today's meeting, and we have Hannah Prince and Tim Barrett here to present. So, Hannah, so I hand over to you.
Thanks, Councillor Dyer. So we did a scrutiny workshop on the draft corporate business plan in the middle of March, on March 16th, with invites to all scrutiny commissions. And I think we got 14 members in total. And I just want to reiterate my thanks for your time and feedback. I know officers found it a really helpful session. Following that workshop, we did make some subsequent changes to the corporate business plan that I'll come on to highlight. The plan has subsequently been agreed by Corporate Leadership Board and will now go to Cabinet for noting only on May 2nd. Overall, we took on feedback and have sought to sort of update the drafting, really to ensure sort of further clarity of language and good use of plain English, and that expanded to the glossary as well to make sure it was ready for public readership. We've included a few new actions and amended some existing ones following members' feedback in March. This included taking on feedback across the room that actually the draft document as it stood in March didn't necessarily have as many actions relating to culture in particular, and this has since been reflected in a new action that includes reference to Bristol Beacon being reopened. We've included a specific reference in regard to the youth zone and included a new action there. We also took on feedback around our global networks and have now included a reference to the Climate Change Conference later this year, COP28. Members also highlighted there was an omission on first reading around specific reference to fuel poverty, which we've now included. Building on an existing action in the draft plan in relation to our action plans on tackling damp and mould, we've also now added a new action regarding licensing and enforcement of standards to improve conditions in the private rented sector. So I just wanted to draw that to members' attention. Following Corporate Leadership Board a few weeks ago, we've also added a new action to prepare the organisation for the new regulatory framework from the Care Quality Commission for Adult Social Care Services, which has been implemented from this April and wasn't included in the draft that members saw at the workshop. I'll pass on to Tim in regard to further measures, but in regard to the key performance indicators, following sort of member feedback, we did also revise and add some additional KPIs, one of which was including regarding reducing the number of council houses on the list for housing repairs. Many of members' comments from the workshop that I referenced in the report effectively related to some of the words and language used within the KPIs. Some of these derive from national measures and language, which allows us to be able to compare ourselves with comparative places. But we recognise that some of that does need a bit of plain English review, but we have used the national measures where applicable. And then a range of feedback was provided that officers have taken away and will inform sort of ongoing discussions with partners or key groups, as well as council policies as they continue to be developed. But I just wanted to reiterate my thanks for the workshop, which we found very helpful. But I'll pass on to Tim for anything further.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Just to pick a little bit up about the performance framework, Guy Collins sends his apologies today due to ill health. Members are, I think, familiar now with the annual performance framework that accompanies the business plan. It encompasses city outcomes, which look at some of the citywide measures, which the council obviously wants to influence, but doesn't have sole control over. And we've, in this edition of the business plan and performance framework, actually separated that out slightly more clearly in the layout of the document. It then also includes the annual business plan measures and actions. So they're in two parts: performance metrics, or KPIs, and action tracking against actions in the business plan which may not lend itself so well to KPIs but may benefit from milestone tracking. Throughout the year we take a thematic approach to that, so for every one of the 7 themes in the business plan and corporate strategy we hold quarterly performance clinics on that theme, each sponsored by a council director, to take a deeper look into specific topics of interest and emerging patterns of performance. And members will recall the subsequent reports from those clinics are presented to scrutiny as part of the quarterly performance reporting. That approach has been well received in the last year and is now quite well embedded, so that is something we will be continuing during the coming year. Just in terms of some of the specific feedback and changes to KPIs since your helpful workshop that Hannah alluded to, there's been a few changes to KPIs that I'll just highlight. There was a suggestion to move KPI 2, which was about the number of organisations in Bristol which are living wage accredited, to city outcomes, reflecting that that was a citywide measure and not just a council initiative. So that's been reflected in the final document. Members, I think, sought to clarify if KPI 5, which is around procurement and contract spend with small and medium-sized enterprises, was for the council or the wider city. We can confirm that's for the council's spend only, so we've sought to clarify that in the wording of the KPI. And following corporate leadership board's conversation and direction, we've also added a KPI around compliance with SIPFA's financial management code as one of the indicators of good governance, and we'll be tracking that this year as well. So our next move will be into the annual target setting process with senior officers and the administration, and we'll be beginning the quarterly performance reporting into scrutiny commissions and cabinet throughout the year. The only other thing I would just bring to your attention from the report on the performance framework is a long proposed and hopefully very welcome improvement plan this year, which is the building of a performance scorecard. So this will be an interactive dashboard which will give live time information on the KPIs where we have it. So it will be something that will be available to officers and to members at all times. So rather than rely on this sort of very static quarterly reporting for the things that we can do more regularly, or even just to give a more insightful view of that quarterly picture, there will be that performance scorecard launched during the year. We're currently in the design and build phase of that, so hopefully that will be a welcome improvement that helps with some of the timeliness of performance reporting in the year. So I think that's all from me, but very pleased to take any questions.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Hannah. Just a couple of comments from myself first. One is the workshop was very useful. Obviously, at present, we tend to restrict that to members of scrutiny. As we move on to the new system of governance under the committee model, almost all of us will be sat on committees that will be making decisions and will therefore also need to understand how we scrutinise. So I imagine we'll still be doing something similar to this, but we would probably need to open that up to all councillors, not just to scrutiny, because the distinction between scrutiny members and other councillor members will be less distinct. And the other thing I would say is that obviously this is the draft version of the business plan. My suggestion would be that, except for councillors who say they don't want a hard copy, is when we do get the hard copy printed, can we make sure that each and every councillor gets one in their inbox? Because I think it is important that, particularly not just for this year, but also going forward, that every single councillor is aware of what the councillor's business plan is. Most of us on this committee have an advantage because we tend to see a bit more than some of our colleagues may get a chance to do. With that, I'm going to hand over to questions. So who would like to go first? Councillor Bradshaw.
Thanks, Chair. I couldn't be at the workshop, unfortunately, so this might well be an issue that was covered, but we refer to the combined authority an awful lot because obviously they're a big key partner of ours. Do we work through this alongside WECA to ensure there's alignment between their priorities and our priorities, their funding allocations and ours, because, you know, as we've heard previously in the public forum, particularly on public transport, we can do very little without WECA now, and this applies across the board in a number of areas. So I just want to make sure that this is fully aligned with WECA priorities, WECA spend, WECA forward plan as well. And then I've got a second more detailed point, if I may, as well.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So I think there are regular touch points between, for example, myself and my equivalent over in the Combined Authority, where we share sort of initial drafting and thoughts. They're certainly not part of the sort of decision pathway or the sign-off, obviously, as you'd expect, but I think certainly, and a lot of the actions that we've seen within our corporate plan for next year have been long in planning or are projects that are due to be initiated. So much of it will have gone through the Combined Authority sort of discussion forums and various groups. But it's certainly, yeah, it's a really good bit of feedback, and I think maybe there's something about surfacing those conversations a bit clearer in the actual final document to show that working is something we could take away. But certainly there are those touch points, and we do share that information where needed.
And then my second more detailed point is in relation to TC3, safe and active travel, which on this screen says it's on page 67, but might vary according to which version you have. This is about the work in regard to livable neighbourhoods. It mentions work underway for the East Bristol scheme, but in the budget a couple of months ago, we also agreed funding to begin the scoping for a South Bristol scheme centred around BS3. But that isn't in here, and of course, this is for the forthcoming year when you'd expect that scoping work to be undertaken. So I'm just wondering why that's also not included, unless I've misunderstood this particular section.
So it might be because much of the source for the corporate business plan comes through service plannings that actually begin in autumn of the previous year. So services will be drafting their corporate plans for the following year, I think from September to December. And it might be that at the point at which we started drafting, the actual proposals that were agreed at the budget were not then yet reflected in the service plans, but will be absorbed over the coming months. So that might explain the omission, but I will take that back and speak to the relevant service team who are leading that pilot scheme.
Yes, please, because I'd be worried if we weren't able to start any scoping work until the autumn. That would be quite a disadvantage. Thank you.
Councillor Fodor.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, I took part in the workshop, and thank you for including the summary of what we covered in that. I guess it's a sign of the times that there are priorities identified in the Council's corporate strategy and not allocated any action in the business plan because of the limited resources. And we need to reflect on that. We're making commitments and then unable to allocate resources. And, it's disappointing. I'm sure we're all disappointed with that. But it's worrying because we obviously want to tackle certain things and no one's going to be prioritising tackling them in the coming year. On another note, the KPIs, I can recall in the workshop, we identified some cases where we have a mismatch between what indicator we're measuring and what action we are prioritising. And I think some of that is picked up in here, but it's a sort of lesson for the future, really, that we need to know we are tracking the progress on the things we say we are, rather than just gathering the information we can get or we traditionally got. So that's an ongoing thing. I know it comes up, and the more often we change the KPIs, the more difficult it is to track progress anyway, because then you get a new set of data appearing out of nowhere one year. And then finally, there's just, I think, a significant point for us and for the whole council, and I think it's really helpful you've suggested, Chair, that we all members get a copy of this when it's ready, because the committee model working group has said in future the main structure of committees needs to be the corporate priority themes. So that is a challenge for officers who will be coming from different parts of the council and working on related issues of the same theme. And it will be a challenge for members to say, we've got all these things we want done, but we have we will have one committee where we're trying to manage that in the future policy committees. So I suspect we're going to need some training for both officers and members about this, what some people might call matrix management, or kind of relating other. It's not in silos. It's about the theme and the bits of the organisation that relate to that theme. So I hope there'll be more joined up working in future, but we might need help kind of preparing for that. That's my observation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Stephen, I think you want to make a point.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just to sort of support what you've said in some areas there, Councillor. I mean, I think, first of all, not all of the KPIs have actions. That's true. And I think it's a conversation we've had internally a lot, particularly over the last 6 months as we've looked at our budget challenges, at a time when we are clearly facing really significant financial pressures. My guess is that as this is only a snapshot, and as we just heard from the South Bristol Liverpool neighbourhood example, it will always be out of date the minute it's written. I would expect there may be some other KPIs in here which don't get the action that we would like to give them. We need to give you a means of understanding what prioritisation, happens on a daily basis. But I would expect more change over the next 6 months as we perhaps have to focus even more of the scarce resource on fewer of the really existential ones. But we do need to find a way of enabling you to understand what's happening. To your wider point, I think it's an ongoing process of education and information. And just a final one for me, I do think that internally this year it's been really useful in a way that I don't think it has been as useful in years gone by, to be honest, for officers to have this framework. So we have, I think, changed the way we use this framework to help guide our internal work. We have these performance improvement boards and various things that have come in over the last 12 months. So I think we're actually in quite good shape because it feels more real than it's ever done before, certainly in my time here, as a kind of a way of looking into the organisation to see what we're doing and how we're doing. We're doing more and more of sort of organising ourselves internally as officers around these themes. So in a really hard environment where we're making brutal choices and we cannot deliver against all these KPIs, I think we're in actually not a bad place for a change to a committee system.
Just to very briefly add on the KPIs as well, and it's always a slight tension with this. The KPIs in the business plan don't necessarily relate directly to every action in the business plan because the KPIs track the corporate strategy priorities over the longer term as well. So that's why we've introduced some of the action tracking against the specific business plan actions. It can still sometimes be hard to see that link, and I think we always challenge ourselves on how valid it is, but just for that assurance, the KPIs track the corporate strategy outcomes over the longer term.
And I think the thing I'll just add as well is that I think we're all aware that all plans are completely accurate up until their first contact with reality. And what we'll all be finding, as most of us have already, is that there has to be a degree of flexibility in how we respond to changing circumstances. And as I think I've said before, when others are aware, local authorities often find themselves at the one end of the stick in terms of how much ability we have to completely set our own path. With that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Councillor Kent.
Thanks. I realise we're sort of at a stage now where this is pretty much the final plan and we're commenting on it. Some of my comments are going to be quite specific, so I guess I'm putting them there in the public domain. I'm not necessarily expecting detailed answers. So it's predominantly going to be in the area of the children and young people and skills. First, the theme 1 introduction paragraph talks about, which we're all aware of, which is the pressure on the high needs block. And also the need to continue to improve in SEND provision. There obviously is a tension between those two statements because clearly we're looking at inevitably dealing with pressure in the high needs block means spending less money, and then trying to improve provision at the same time is a difficult ask. That was just a comment rather than, because I realise we would like to be able to achieve both, but in reality that's going to be very tough to achieve both. There are certainly areas where provision can be improved, which doesn't necessarily cost money, but to achieve both of those targets is going to be a tough ask on officers. I just want on CYP1, Child-Friendly City, we talk about our partnership with the Integrated Care Board. I was sort of wondering how confident we are in their ability to help us deliver this new project, given their recent changes to autism diagnosis, which is not only being legally challenged, but it's completely out of step. In fact, I would say in breach of NHS guidelines, which interestingly the NHS published just a week or two after they changed their policy here by the Integrated Care Board, which can only, one presume, be in response to that policy, making it clear that it's out of step with the NHS. Are we confident that the Integrated Care Board actually have the resources to be able to deliver this new programme? Because I'm very keen that we do more looking at trauma-informed. I think it could be a big area of improvement, particularly for children with SEND. But how confident are we that they have the resources to deliver this?
So I get a response to that first, Stephen.
Clearly, the issues you're referring to with Serona, are still the subject of a conversation that's ongoing, certainly from our perspective, and I know the other unitary authorities are in a similar position. The ICB is best described as an early stage venture. I mean, it is. I'm on the board, I think you may know, and it feels like it has a long way to go, and its governance, its the balance between clinical decision making and looking at the wider outcomes, and frankly the culture, the different cultures of the NHS and local government. There needs to be a lot of work done on it. I don't think there's any point in dressing it up. I would say that it's getting better, but is it moving fast enough to address the challenges and the rate at which we are facing them? I think it's a good question. They have their own budget challenges, you may know. I think it's a 40% cut in their own core funding. They've been asked to deliver as an ICB, as an entity, which clearly will take away some of their, focus. That's a very inward-facing challenge they face themselves. And at this stage, they are very heavily driven by the culture of NHS England, driving those top-level measures. However, we do have a draft integrated care strategy, early stage, and the strategy is really important. We have been emphasising at every stage that we need to set the framework at what is right for our local system, whether it's children and young people, whether it's health inequality. So there is a lot of work going on, I'm pleased to say, at taking what is in effect the new version of a different construct of something that's been around for a long time and has clearly been very heavily driven by top-down and a small number of top-down metrics, introducing into it what the actual constitution of the ICB says it's about, which is about looking at drivers of population health inequality. If we can get that strategy right and really ensure that it's locally led as well as clinically informed, I think that's our best chance. But in the short term, there were some really big headwinds for all of us, and we are, of course, part of that. We have our own pressures around adult social care, around discharge to assess, of course, children and families in the high needs block. Every organisation is facing its challenges, and I suppose that it's probably fair to note the risk that we all face is whilst we're trying to form a new partnership and genuinely focus on that win-win, that transformation that we're all after, we've all got slightly different masters, and we all have different bottom lines. So it's not without risk, but I think in a sense we have no choice but to engage fully and wholeheartedly in it.
Thank you. I'm afraid I've got several of these, so if I just go through, but thank you for the answer. Obviously, I'm trying to make sure we keep the pressure up also, that we get positive change, because at the moment that is the current policy. They brought that in on the 1st of March. That's how they're currently operating.
Tim, what I'll let you do a couple more, and then I'll let a couple of other people come in and then come back to you.
You can come back to me again. That's fine. Right. I will carry on, because this is an opportunity to get it out there and into the minds of those that counts, the people who run this authority. On On the next one, actually, regarding children's homes, one thing I just wanted to raise, which was brought to people's scrutiny, was a concern by foster parents about a change to our building ownership. So I think we were looking to dispose of a building in Brislington, which houses social workers, but also is used as a bit of a contact centre and a safe zone for foster parents and their children. They were very, very worried about the loss of that facility. So I just raised that as an issue that could potentially undermine this action, and where we're just looking to rationalise our buildings, which is a perfectly understandable cost-saving measure, but at the same time there could be an unintended fallout, which is that building's used by foster parents and children as a contact centre in Brislington. So I've forgotten the name of the building, but it's one of the ones in Brislington, and People's Scrutiny received correspondence.
Is it St Anne's House?
Sorry?
Is it St Anne's House?
No, I don't think so. I'll double check and get that to you. I mean, we have raised that with other officers, so they are looking into it, and there's a paper coming back. I just sort of raised that as an issue, because obviously foster parents are key to ensuring people have stable lives, but us recruiting foster parents is also a big budgetary saving measure rather than having to go out to the private market. Shall I stop there at that point and give way to someone else, so you can come back to me? Otherwise, it looks like I just go on and on.
Okay, I'll take you up on that offer. Thank you, Tim. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of feedback points about the scrutiny workshop. So on page 86, on the environment and sustainability section, there's some questions about the Scope 3 emissions. I'd really like to know about why it wouldn't be appropriate to set targets for some of the emissions, and can we have some idea about what those emissions actually are? Because I, for one, don't like surprises after May 24. I'd like to know what those emissions actually are at the moment, please.
This is in the summary report of our workshop. Sorry, one second. It might be that without giving you a clear, what I might do is take that one away, Councillor Wilcox, and just speak to my colleague who actually informed that answer, just to give you a really clear response, because obviously it's information that we're aware of, but I guess it's the nature of how we're able to track it as it stands today in the organisation. So I think what I'll do, if that's okay with you, is I'll take that one away and follow up in writing.
Okay, thank you. The other one is on page 87, which is to explore a KPI in relation to the percentage of people coming into the centre to work regularly, and the choice of using park and ride passengers as that target. I think there should be some other KPIs that are involved in that assessment, particularly about the number of people who use active travel to walk and cycle into the centre, not just using park and ride passengers.
Noting that down. I think, again, I'll have to go away and speak to because there'll be an engagement between our Insight Performance and Intelligence team, who unfortunately one of our colleagues is poorly today, and the actual transport team and the colleagues who will be measuring that. So again, there'll have been some thorough discussion around the reason they have focused on park and ride, but I think that's good feedback again. So if you don't mind, apologies doing it twice, but I'll come back to you in writing to give you a clearer explanation on that KPI. Okay, thank you. And I have a more general comment about the whole document, and I suppose you could say it also has a certain amount of irony, considering this is an all-male scrutiny panel, that gender equality does not seem to be considered as particularly highly across the whole document. It's noted in children and equality, which is important. It does feature in the economy skills theme, and it does feature in the effective development organisation theme, but it's not noted as an employer of choice priority, which I find interesting. Also, I feel it's completely ignored in transport, because women do feel unsafe walking and cycling around Bristol.
And I think it does need to be noted really highly that Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is gender equality, is recognised in this document properly. And I don't think it is.
Just to pick up on one point, we will confirm also back to service plans, because of course not everything from service plans gets to the document, so we'll pick up those specifics in there as well and check for you. I do recall some back and forth over the nighttime safety, so we'll confirm the status of that for you. Just in terms of the gender equality in the workforce, that is a KPI at least that we do track. So although the actions are lacking this year in terms of ones raised into the business plan, the ongoing monitoring and target setting against the gender pay gap reduction does continue, and that will be part of the ongoing monitoring of all the quality statistics in HR.
Thank you.
Councillor Gollop.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. I sort of recognise that this is the administration's business plan, so I don't expect to be gushing in enthusiasm and support for every aspect of it. I welcome the workshop. That's a really positive engagement. And over the years, I think the business plan has developed. It comes across as more user-friendly, and I can understand and support a lot of the messages. But I raised at the workshop concerns that there was an element where I think the report that's published has to be realistic. And whilst I don't expect it to say how bad things necessarily are, I think the tone may imply that things are not as serious as they actually are. And I just sort of give examples in the transport and connectivity situation section. TC2 talks about improved bus services, and there's a number of items about improving local bus services, but we heard from David, and we're all hearing from our residents. And so to me, if I was a resident who couldn't, if a nurse who can't get to a hospital to work, or a student who can't get to their place of education, and reading a report that says we're going to improve local bus services, I really don't think that is acknowledging the situation as it is in a way that can engage with residents. Now, I understand, and hearing what David and others say, I can understand that the problem very significantly lies with the West of England Combined Authority. So I'm not looking to make a Bristol political issue out of it, but a document from Bristol that says this is what we're going to do when we start off the year with something that actually removes those local bus services. And so I give that as an example, but in the same section, TC3, safe and active travel, there's a comment about using income generated from the clean air zone to improve air quality in the city, help fund transport projects. But as I understand it, we're not going to be told what the income is from the clean air zone until 12 months in. So how can that be in a business plan if actually that information isn't going to be available? So it's just a question of things that I think the wording needs to be looked at for a reality check to say, is this in the real world for what we are saying to our residents? Because there's a danger that actually it loses the credibility that it largely deserves by picking on issues where we aren't achieving. And we don't have to defend where we are because it's not all our fault we're in that situation. So let's be realistic and set a tone for what we want to achieve from there.
Obviously, not wishing to get into the detail, this is a clearly politically led document, so it's the Cabinet Member for Transport's probably best place to answer those. But I would say that, just to pick you up on a point of clarity, the vision is that we want better bus services. Would anybody disagree? Right, so it's not an action. It says we should look at specific proposals for improved bus services to do with mitigations around the new arena in Bristol and work with WECA on exploring things like an enhanced partnership. So I actually don't think, if you look below the headlines, this is wide of the mark. I totally agree we need to reflect current reality and not be accused of being in an ivory tower, and Dave's made a very eloquent point earlier. I just want to make sure we're not confusing aspiration with reality. I completely agree, but I think everybody would agree the vision is to get better bus services. The current reality is a long way away from that. So I'm just making sure we get the categorisation of what's in which box right here. Also on the CAS, I think it's fair to say the administration has said it's going to wait until I think it's December to produce an update on income. But it's also reasonable to assume there will be income, and the business case that was agreed with JACU, indeed, the submission that went into the CRSTS bid assumed a certain proportion of the funding for match would come from CAS, so that we definitely can plan on the basis there will be some CAS income. I think it's appropriate, therefore, to reflect it in here.
Yeah, Stephen, I don't think you and I disagree on this. The point I'm making, though, is of course we need a business plan has to reflect aspirations, and I have no problem with that. But I think it needs to acknowledge where we start from. And if I was not able to get to work or not able to get to study, and I happened to be reading this because I couldn't get there, and I think, well, hang on, they don't even know what the local bus service is doing to me. So I really think to just make it credible in terms of the local resident, we need to reflect that. But yeah, push the aspiration, totally with that. It's just the background story that I don't think does it justice.
I think the point I'll add to that as well, if you look at theme 6, I mean, it does refer to the West of England Combined Authority. But I agree with Jeff, there perhaps isn't enough emphasis on just how much reliance we have on the West of England Combined Authority and how limited our ability is to influence bus services. Jeff, do you have any more? Councillor Kent.
I could make similar points on other sections, but I'd rather leave it to others who have more knowledge than I do.
Thanks. I'll carry on. Oh, I looked up those properties while I had that little break. It was Capgrave Crescent and Rodbourne Road, which are both used also as well as offices, but also as contact centres, safe spaces for foster parents and their children. So those were the issues being raised with us by the forum on behalf of foster parents in the city.
That's why I gave you the break.
So yeah, I know. See, that gave me a chance to go back and find the statement. Okay, so I'll carry on. Under CYP3, equity in education, I was just slightly surprised at one line within the action plan for regarding the SEND partnership plan and accelerated action plan. There's a line in here that work includes establishing parent-carer forums. I mean, one, there is a parent-carer forum already in the city. There has been one for many, many years. Standard practice is that there is one parent-carer forum, which then works with the national organisation Contact, and is then recognised by the local authority as the parent-carer forum. I'm unsure why it's a political priority of the administration to establish multiple parent-carer forums in this city where one already exists. It's my understanding they have been actually working on this now for many, many months and have established 0 additional parent-carer forums. Was there an update on that?
So again, that would come from the overall service plan for that particular part of the education service. So that was as it stood in the drafting of their service plan. So again, I can take that one away, but yeah, as it stands, it went through sort of executive director and others sort of approval. So it does seem like it's a piece of work underway, but we can certainly provide a bit more detail if
Thanks.
No,
I mean, it might have been better if they included a line like trying to make sure children didn't have to wait 50 weeks to get through the EHCP process. Something like, which is actually a recent policy that they've been implementing and trying to implement, not always successfully, but that would have a lot more substance than working to include establishing parent care reforms, which actually seems to be an attack on partnership with parents rather than trying to improve it. Anyway, I'll move on.
Just a second, Tim.
Yeah,
Tim,
sorry.
did you want to come in, or were...
No, it's a similar point to Hannah, so we'll clarify. I was wondering if it's proper noun versus plain English, meaning forums for parents and carers, but we'll check for you and make sure we clarify.
Go on, Tim.
Right, thank you very much. I said there already is a forum, so they don't really need to establish any more. Okay, let me just scroll down. Let me try to find the point I wanted to raise. There's a lot in here, and I've lost it. But I know the point I wanted to raise. There was a point actually, I think, about interacting with people when they earlier on when they begin to. Here it is, CYP4. The Criminal Justice Board. So trying to interact with younger people, I think, early on regarding the Criminal Justice Board, just regarding some recent casework that I've experienced, it's quite clear that actually really early on, even before they're hitting the Criminal Justice Board, young people are coming into contact with authorities. Often they're in crisis, maybe that there is trauma in their backgrounds. And the standard sort of response at the moment, because obviously everybody's budgets are limited, is that the children just return to the parents, you know. They go missing, they return to the parents. They're involved in low-level crime, they return to the parents. They may be sexually active as children, they return to the parents. That clearly is not a system that is putting the protection of the child first. And I'm being quite generic here because some of these cases are very, very sensitive. But having now been involved in one and seeing one go on, it's quite clear to me the police are aware quite early on where there are problems, but what there isn't is other agencies coming in to help on that. And some of these cases are actually perhaps not in Bristol, but near Bristol, so it's not a particular criticism of Bristol. It's how can we try to get all services working together to tackle that at even an earlier stage than the sort of where they're actually being brought into the criminal system. It's just quite often there's quite a substantial amount of contact with these younger people before they get to that stage. So that was just a point I wanted to make. Otherwise, you'll be pleased to hear, I'm going to shut up now. Thank you very much. I'll come up with something else to have a go at you next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any more questions from anybody else? Okay. I've forgotten whether we're supposed to be noting the report or approving it. I think we're approving it. Is that? Or noting it? No, because it's going to... Cabinet. Yeah, it's Cabinet. Okay. So we're noting the report, and thank you both for coming along. And that now brings us on to agenda item number 8, which is the 22-23 Scrutiny Annual Report, which you've all seen a copy of. Now, hopefully you've all had a chance to read it. If anybody has any comments or any changes that they think might need to be added, please let me know now. Councillor Fodor.
This is just meant to be a sort of a constructive observation, Chair. It's a very descriptive report. I totally understand the need to catalogue what has been scrutinised over the year, but I felt, I only know a couple of the scrutiny commissions in detail because I'm on them, so I know the work of those. But I suspect there could have been an opportunity to highlight more clearly the stronger messages that whatever scrutiny took place made particular points and emphasised these are ones it's recommending, because that's the policy development or you know, sort of critical scrutiny role that it has. So rather than just describing, or as well as just describing the things that were talked about, here are some of the most important messages that have been sent. And I think one or two are sort of mentioned there. Won't sort of pick on them, but presumably there were some from each commission, and that is the main outcome really, is to send those messages, not to just say, yeah, we scrutinised. So I say it's more trying to think of a constructive way to show the business that has been achieved by those, maybe next time.
Yeah, point taken. I think for that to work, what we would need is for the chairs of each scrutiny committee to discuss either at their own Leeds meetings, because it has to be representative of what each committee, the messages have to be basically approved by at least a majority of the committee members. But yes, we can certainly take that on board for the next annual scrutiny report, which will be the last annual scrutiny report for at least 10 years, hopefully longer. But yeah, we'll take that on board for future report. It may well be that the final report, if I'm still chair, I may take the liberty of making that a slightly longer one. Any further comments? Okay, and this annual scrutiny report is to be approved, so all those in favour, please say aye. Okay, that's approved unanimously. Agenda item number 9 is the work programme. I'm going to hand over to Bronwyn just to quickly cover a couple of things on that.
Thank you very much, Chair. For the current work programme for the 22-23 year, this is our last planned meeting, but I just wanted to raise that we're currently working on future work programming. That it should be a date in everyone's diaries for the 6th of June, which will be a workshop where we'll be working with senior officers to construct next year's work programming, and the scrutiny team are currently in the process of talking to other officers about bringing some useful information to that workshop. So the 6th of June is the date to keep in mind. Thanks.
Or to help you remember D-Day, Councillor Kent.
Thanks, Chair. We've had 2 members of the public address us today. Well, 1 councillor and 1 member of the public regarding issues that they wanted us to either be aware of or look into. I was just thinking, at any point, do we want to add those to the list that we look at as part of the work programming event which we're planning, or what, or refer them to a particular scrutiny commission to look at? Just obviously they weren't on our agenda as say today, so I think they obviously wanted us to do something about it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I would imagine that with David's statement, that would probably go to GNR. And in terms of Councillor Eddie's, because that's more to do with the arm's length companies, that would probably go to OSM. But when we have our workshop meeting, we can discuss that in more detail then. Councillor Gollop.
Yeah, a number of us here have the joys of being involved in WECA committees, either audit or scrutiny. And it does seem to me, in terms of our work programme going forward, that interaction with WECA is something we have to identify and work with, in the hope that we can be proactive in helping to avoid some of the challenges that have happened. And again, this isn't I don't perceive this as a opposition member against the administration. I actually see it as a cross-party Bristol-wide issue that we have to work in influencing. So it's really just a plea that can we make sure in planning for the agenda setting, work setting, that we make sure there is some space for Bristol Scrutiny to be a catalyst in the process of trying to get things talked through in the appropriate way before decisions are effectively forced upon the WECA committee, without it being necessarily discussed in the way that proper governance would suggest it should be. So just a plea, can we try and make sure that doesn't get overlooked? And I don't want to start talking about WECA at the agenda setting meeting, really, because once I start, I find it very hard to stop. But can we make sure that we do, if other members share that view, set some allocation next year for that?
Thanks, Jeff. And I think I agree. I think what would be useful, I think, is that to establish exactly what it is that we're able to scrutinise or to comment upon as a Bristol scrutiny body. Because obviously there is a WECA scrutiny as well, so we want to make sure that what we're doing is not conflicting with that body, of which you and others are a member. But I think subject to having that discussion about where our boundaries need to be, I do agree that, as was mentioned earlier, the increasing influence of decisions being made by West of England Combined Authority upon what this council does, it becomes increasingly impossible for us to do our scrutiny work properly without taking into account the role of WECA. So yes, we will look at that.
Just to add to that, Tony, the challenge that I perceive is that the way WECA scrutiny has been working is that it has a few days' notice before a WECA committee meeting papers are discussed to meet and discuss items that have already been finalised and aren't going to be significantly affected by the discussion. But what it's not doing is getting involved in policy development and commenting at an earlier stage where it might influence. So actually WECA scrutiny has very limited capabilities of playing a part, whereas Bristol scrutiny, working with senior officers and the administration, could actually be asking questions and being briefed to ask questions of WECA that could help it to achieve. So I think there is a role for us to be more proactive than members are currently able to be, but hopefully in a constructive way, and possibly if we can work with the administration, that would actually make it much more powerful, because I think this is very much a shared interest.
Okay, thank you. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gold, as we know, you and I have spoken quite a lot about the fact, with you as the OSM Chair and me as the Chief Exec, we're both quite actively looking at the situation you describe, and I suppose there's something in this which is worth scrutiny's time, but recognising that a lot of what we're trying to do is get alignment in a way that we go into a conversation that has other people, other stakeholders in it. So we just have to try and reflect, how do you do that if it's a public process? So a lot of what I know you and I have discussed is how we need to ensure that those public meetings are more productive and frankly aren't punctuated by adjournments. We actually want to do more business, not in private, not in secret, but frankly doing our job, doing our job properly, about actually showing proper leadership. And we can do scrutiny, but I just think we need to pick our topic. For example, it's entirely legitimate to ask a question of officers here about how do you, when formulating your plan around transport or economic development, how do you factor in WECA into your own formulation of your ideas? Is WECA a funder, or is it a partner, or in fact are they the lead and you follow? And I think there are some interesting points around the governance. I say interesting, if you're of a particular way of thinking, that might be interesting to some people, possibly not many watching on YouTube, but I think there's something in there around the governance, something around the delivery, so when we are subcontracted, as it were, by WECA to do a piece of infrastructure, how are we managing that? We've made quite a lot of changes actually to our reporting on projects and programs, so that we get sort of one way of working as a council, whether it's a WECA funded project or a BCC project, because we need to send them reports. You won't see any of that. Most of it's not that relevant, but there's actually quite a lot there. And Dave, as Dave knows only too well, it's in those details that delivery either happens or doesn't. So I think there's something here. We can probably explore it together over the next couple of months and work out what would be the most use to Bristol City Council and the sub-region. But there's something there. We just need to pick our causes of it, maybe.
Councillor Wilcox, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just looking at the diary for June the 6th, we have the Scrutiny work programme setting workshop. Then we have an item of hold for overview Scrutiny Management Board. And then a couple of hours after that, it's Cabinet. I'm just wondering if we can actually do due justification, do scrutiny for the Cabinet papers if we're having an Oz and B meeting 3 hours before Cabinet.
I think the problem is, as Bonwin will tell you, is trying to find dates in the diary where we have all the people available. With the scrutiny work programme session, for instance, one of the key things about that is having as many officers and cabinet members available to input into those sessions. And ironically, it just so happens that often cabinet day is also the day when, for similar reasons, we have those people available. I think what we need to do as much as possible is make sure that we get the cabinet papers published as early as possible. It's going to shift the problem onto cabinet rather than onto OSM. But the point is taken, but it is a question of logistics as much as anything else. And in an ideal situation, we would love to do it on a different day. But as I've said in another meeting as well, we are increasingly being asked to do more with less. And this is the reality of the situation of us having to fit basically shoehorn things into when we have the availability of the people that need to be there. Bonwin.
Hi, just to clarify as well, the OSM meeting on the same day is specifically to approve the work programme that will be coming out of the workshop earlier on in the day. So those two meetings are of a piece. It is a little bit unfortunate, as the Chair was saying, about the timing of that immediately before Cabinet, but I'm sure there is some piece of work that maybe OSM leads can be doing about making sure that we're prepared for the cabinet meeting at the same time as well. So really we're trying to separate those two items. Thanks.
Before I go to Councillor Fodor, also just to add, we're open to follow the same format as the last one, where at the end it's only the OSM members, we're the only ones that are going to be working the longer stretch, if you like. We would be releasing most of the other councillors to go away and prepare for a cabinet. So for some of us, we may need to get other people to ask questions on our behalf. Councillor Fodor.
Yeah, thanks. It relates to drawing up the programme for the next year. So it's sort of bridge between this item and the forward plan, which appears in the next item. There's nothing in the forward plan apart from after May the 2nd, apart from one single item in the June Cabinet. If we're trying to prepare, you just use the term like approve the scrutiny work programme, and I know there's flexibility in it, but to think we don't know anything other than one item after the 2nd of May that's coming to Cabinet, we can't draw up a work programme dealing with major items coming to Cabinet if we don't know what they are. And that's happened before. It's a perennial problem, but it's a very real one. We need to know what's in the pipeline. Now, as one scrutiny chair, I've started having meetings with cabinet members, and I aim to talk to all the senior officers to know what's in their pipeline. But even then, we'll only get 3 dates in the whole kind of programme to meet, and we might be at the wrong time of year for items they're preparing. So it's a bit of a problem, really.
Yes, and the scrutiny team are having those conversations as well. So we do intend to come to that workshop as well prepared as possible. Obviously, there'll be things that may be coming up at a later date that we can't speak to yet. But we'll be doing what we can to prepare as much by that date. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I'm quite confident to say there'll be a lot more available for when we have that workshop meeting. Which may be part of the reason why there's not so much available for this forward plan. And with that in mind, I'm going to move on to agenda item number 10, which is the Mayor's forward plan. And I think we have this ongoing situation with the forward plan, which is one we've been trying to tackle for quite a while, about getting items on that plan as soon as possible. and also as far in advance as possible. And I think we're all aware of that, and it's something, I'm bringing up again because I think we do need to keep emphasising that the forward plan does need to be kept as up to date as possible. Obviously, we do recognise that things change quite quickly. Does anybody else want to make any comment on the forward plan? Stephen?
Only to acknowledge that it is a problem that we need to fix, and I know it's been the same in previous years. It's not an excuse, but it is, I think, a reflection of the municipal year and how people's minds sort of focus on what are we doing this year, and then from September to October, it's head down, look at budget, get through the year end. It's not, that's just how it is. It's not how it should be. But I do know, and I've seen a number of attempts have been made internally to get officers to go back, those of whom haven't been taking all their leave, of course, which they've all been doing in March. So I'm pretty confident that it will look different in May, but it shouldn't really be this way. We should have a rolling series of, replenishing forward plans. But the municipal year seems to cast a strange shadow over everyone's sort of way of working. We'll keep going at it, but by the 6th of June, well before, we'll have something. And as you say, please use all of your other routes to talk to officers to get them to recognise that this has to come. It doesn't seem to come naturally. Even things are going to happen every quarter seem not to be on the forward plan. It's a bit of a mystery in that respect.
Okay, any other comments? Councillor Gollop?
Just as Stephen was saying that, it did seem to me that there are quite a number of items that repeat at the same time each year. And I don't know whether it is possible, but thinking ahead to the change in system and planning for the committees that will meet, it would be incredibly helpful if the forward plan was actually rolling and replaced month on month, so that the decisions of how we're going to be governed next year actually start to slot into place with what committees have to meet. And I know we can't hold a new administration to what goes when, but quite a number of those building bricks have got to happen anyway. So just a plea, would that be feasible?
May I? I mean, I think that certainly, as you say, the non-contentious, straightforward should be on there. As a principle, if a committee wishes to instigate something a bit more formal that requires almost like a monthly check-in, with a 12-month look ahead, because clearly there are monthly check-ins with the Mayor's office every month. That's entirely reasonable. I think there's another factor here, which is there clearly is a bit of a quietening happening in the forward plan generally because of the issue you just raised. So clearly big decisions, which are going to not actually take effect until after May 24, there will start to be fewer of them, frankly. So that's another reason why it's perhaps looks a bit thinner. But we'll take it all away, and I think your point about formalising a monthly 12-month look ahead refresh sounds sensible. We'll certainly have a look at that as officers now. We'll see what we can do.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. As another former chair of Oslam, I'd like to thank the officers for doing a much better job this year on the forward plan than was certainly the case in earlier years, particularly I recall 2014 and 15. It really was, you think you're hard pressed now on the forward plan. Trust me, you don't know you're born compared to what Jeff and I had to deal with. So I'd like to thank officers for having done that work. It's going to be particularly important in this next year as we ready ourselves for the committees system, in that it's going to be important that committees have very good long sight of decisions that are coming forward so that they can plan their work properly. It's going to be much more difficult because you won't be in a position where you can just run along the corridor to the cabinet member, you'll have to gather several councillors together in order to get some of these decisions made. So long sight is going to be very much more important, and the time to start that will be, well, immediately. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, agenda item number 11 is purely for noting and for information. This is the minutes of the WECA Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Given the conversations we had just now, potentially that item may become less of a noting, and we may have more coverage of that going forward as a way to discuss what's happening at WECA. But that brings us to, I believe, the end of the meeting. This is the final Overview and Scrutiny Management Board meeting for this year. I'd like to thank all the committee members here today and those who used it here, and thank them for their work and their effort. It's been a pleasure to be the chair of this committee. So we have the scrutiny planning workshop on D-Day, 6th of June. We won't be starting at the crack of dawn, but you may want to start preparing for it at the crack of dawn. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.